This is the Royal Report.
Good evening and welcome to the Royal Report. I'm Caroline DeRusso. And we might be closing in on Christmas, but the royal news is not slowing down. Here's what we've got on the show. The High Court has found Prince Harry was a victim of extensive phone hacking and has awarded him a huge sum. We'll bring you the latest on his court victory and analyse what it means for his war against the media. Netflix series The Crown is coming under fire for its depiction of former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Angela Mollard was a reporter in London at the time and she'll tell us whether The Crown got it right. Plus, one glaring omission in Harry and Meghan's 2023 Christmas card has fans baffled. Esther Cracker will join me later in the show with all the details. But before we get to that, it has been yet another eventful week. Just when I thought the come down from the fallout of the release of Endgame would allow us to slide gracefully into Christmas. Apparently not. This week, Prince Harry, the first senior British royal to give evidence in court for 130 years, has been successful in his action against the Mirror newspapers. The High Court in the UK found that a number of articles published about him resulted from phone hacking, and the offending papers will now have to pay him £140,000 for using unlawful information gathering techniques. These findings relate to conduct in the early 2000s, but it does show the lengths some journalists were prepared to go to feed the royal family news machine. Now, we can't be too sanctimonious on this show. We are here every week to provide you with the latest royal news. But there is a line, and it shouldn't be crossed. And phone hacking is the wrong side of that line. Prince Harry's lawyer said as much following the decision.
I respectfully call upon the authorities, the financial regulator, the stock market who were deliberately deceived by Mirror Group, and indeed the Metropolitan Police and prosecuting authorities to do their duty for the British public and to investigate bringing charges against the company and those who have broken the law.
And while these findings relate to days past, it's interesting how all sides of the royal family have their ways and means of getting their agendas into the press. Even now, there are friendly commentators, leaks, anonymous sources and lashings of contrived narrative framing. It is, after all about public perception. And there are absolutely no angels in this game, but one should always be clear about where the line is and stay on the right side of it. Joining us now is royal commentator Angela Mollard and Sky News contributor Jenna Clark. Ladies, fabulous to have you back. Jenna, Harry has been successful in this court action relating to phone hacking. What's your reaction to the victory?
Yeah, look, Harry, nothing better than an extra $200,000 to come Christmas time when you're pretty much unemployed for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Look, I think the Prince has been pursuing this for such a long time, and it's about time that it has an end point. But it is interesting to note that the Mirror Group have come out and unreservedly apologised for any type of behaviour. We must note that former Mirror editor Piers Morgan, whose very own Sky News host, has come out and given his own statement, given that he was not even allowed to speak to Mirror lawyers or talk to the court case when it was occurring. He said that he has no recollection of this sort of happening under his tenure. So I think it's interesting, but I think this is just more fuel for Harry's fire when it comes to pursuing all things about the horrible media in the UK.
And Angela, these findings relate to activities from 20 years ago, but we know this isn't the first time these sorts of claims have been made. Look, you were there in the bad old days. How rife was it? How much has royal reporting changed, if at all?
Oh, it's changed enormously, Caroline. And yes, I did work in London during the 90s, which is the time that some of these claims relate to. I was never involved in phone hacking. I didn't even know about it until I'd moved to Australia. But there were dastardly tactics being used within British newspapers to get stories. You have to imagine it's an incredibly competitive newspaper environment, 12 daily newspapers, a huge number of weekend newspapers as well. So that competition would drive that need for stories. Now, of course, we knew through the Leveson inquiry the extent to which phone hacking was taking place. But what's interesting, I think, about this case, as you asked, make the point, how has it changed? Royal reporting has changed enormously. In the wake of Princess Diana's death, the old Press Complaints Commission was replaced by the new organisation, which editors signed up to. effectively what that meant is that, particularly when it relates to the royals, Harry and William, when they were children, could not be photographed. And we now see that now. We never, ever see a picture of the royal children that is not set up by the royal family and that has been approved by them. So there's not that paparazzi influence. Editors are not using paparazzi pictures quite to that extent. When it relates to the royal family, celebrities, it's still fairly fair game. But look, of course, we know Harry still has 2 other claims. He's suing 2 other newspaper groups. So there's still the outcome of those cases to come.
And Jenna, Prince Harry has called for a police investigation. We heard his lawyers there. Police have said they will carefully consider the High Court ruling. Given the nature of the findings, a criminal investigation could well be appropriate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think this should just extend to the royal family and celebrities. I think, as Angela mentioned, the Levinson inquiry started due to the horrific murder of a 14-year-old girl back in the day, and it was the inquiries that led to the uncovering of all that. So I think if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. And I think if the police are going to pursue it, don't just allow it to be focused on the page 3 stories and the celebrity stories in some of the tabloids. Make it open slather and see if this is still a common occurrence in newsrooms in the UK.
Now, Angela, a great piece in The Telegraph this week about the series The Crown and how it's altered public perceptions of the royal family. To what extent do you think it's true?
Oh, look, it is fictionalised drama. And look, early on, the early series, I would say there were, things that happened, the Queen's relationship with Churchill. I mean, it was more of a historical drama at that stage. But as it's proceeded, we've got obviously closer to the action. And there's a lot of things that were just fantasy in it. I mean, the notion that Prince Philip was somehow responsible for the death of his sister, the idea that Prince Charles, for instance, sat down with the British Prime Minister John Major and made a play for them to elbow out the Queen and for him to take over. Completely erroneous, and people involved in that at that time have come out and said so. But I think what's really interesting is I have daughters who are aged 20 and 23. They're not interested in the royal family, but because of this show, they now feel that they have an understanding of the royal family and that they actually know this family. Whether that's going to play in the royal family's favour in decades to come, who knows? But there's now a familiarity with some of these characters, which I think is really interesting.
And Jenna, I'd like your thoughts on this and also the likely impact of those changed perceptions. Like Angela said, being based on a show that isn't exactly a documentary. We've got a scene here of where the Queen apparently dreams of Tony Blair becoming king. Take a look at this.
Many had been unable to imagine life without Elizabeth II. But after almost 50 years on the throne, it's out with Queen Elizabeth and in with King Tony. New Britain has a new royal family, the Labour Party.
Jenna, your thoughts?
Look, I absolutely love this. I love the fact that some of the writers have decided, look, because we're sick and tired of the royal family being coy about how much they actually like this series, but are slamming it in public, we're going to throw a real cat amongst the pigeons. I think it is actually probably also endemic of our times that we live in, where we take little pieces of the truth and blow them out to be absolute fantasy, and people sort of believe that is true. But King Tony, it sounds like a hybrid of The Sopranos meets The Crown. I love it.
Excellent. Angela, still on the Crown and Tony Blair, parts of the story talk about how Tony Blair tried to modernise the monarchy. Did he do that? And if so, how successful was he?
Such an interesting question. But firstly, Jenna, I hate that scene. I absolutely loathe it. It's totally jumped the shark for me. Yeah. But to your question, Caroline, yes, he did modernise it. And I was in Britain in 1997. I have never witnessed a general election like it, and I've lived in New Zealand and Australia and the UK and witnessed a series of elections. Tony Blair coming into power in Britain in 1997 to that song "Things Will Only Get Better." later. It brought about Cool Britannia, that was the sort of axis of power between this young, youthful, sort of strident government, and that was very much at odds with the way that the aristocracy and the establishment worked. So there was this huge conflict already at play between monarchy and this modern new government. Then, of course, Diana died later that year, and Tony Blair and his right-hand man, Alistair Campbell, who was a former journalist, very much instructed the Queen, and gently, of course, because she was the monarch, as to how to manage that situation, which we saw depicted so brilliantly in the movie The Queen, which, of course, was directed by the same person as The Crown. Yes, he was influential. To the extent that the Queen was worried about her standing, I honestly don't believe that. But Britain was different, and because Britain was different, the monarchy had to respond to that. And we are still seeing that now. As social media changes the way that we see the monarchy, the royals are having to respond to that, and they're doing it very well. They're very at the forefront of social media and using those channels to transmit their own messages.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a excellent observation, Angela. Jenna, the Sussexes' purse strings appear to be tightening. There are rumours that Meghan wants to reunite with the royals and live at Kensington, but only part-time. I'm not sure if that's viable after the fallout from Endgame, but you'd think there'd have to be some pretty strict conditions if that was to be the arrangement.
Oh, look, I get it. Airbnbs are really tight at this time of year, love. I totally get it, especially in London in winter, I assume. But look, it is interesting. And I wish that the narrative coming out of the Sussex team was not about, money or things like that. It's about the fact that they have two beautiful children that you feel that are just being completely robbed of another part of their family and their heritage. And you just hope for the sake of the kids that bridges are mended in the not too distant future.
And Jenna, staying with you, I've got about a minute left. Camilla is launching her own podcast. How good is this?
I will be counting down the days. Now, Camilla, as we know, is an avid bookworm. We saw it through the pandemic. She regularly put out reading lists of which she was getting into. And I love this. I think she's got the most beautiful, really husky voice. And I love looking forward to that being in my ears. But I'm looking forward to what the Queen Consort is reading, and some of her famous friends like Dame Judi Dench and whoever else are joining her for book club. It's going to be great. Tune in.
Angela, I've got about 30 seconds. Have you got any insights on that?
Oh, I can't wait to hear this podcast. I want her to read out loud a really steamy blockbuster, like a Jilly Cooper or something. Yes. I just think Camilla reading that aloud, that would be awesome.
Look, she played the long game and she won, and it seems like there is absolutely no end to her talents. Ladies, thank you so much for your insights tonight. I really enjoyed that. We'll see you both again shortly. Now, coming up next, Esther Kraku joins me from London on the couple who the Hollywood Reporter claims were the biggest losers of 2023. The identities will come as no surprise to any of the viewers of this show. Welcome back to the show. Joining us now is writer and broadcaster Esther Kraku. Esther, to think we started this year talking about Spare, that seems like a lifetime ago, but the year didn't really improve too much for the Sussexes, finding themselves amongst the biggest losers for 2023.
Yes, so that is according to the Hollywood Reporter, which is basically the Hollywood Bible of the who's who in Tinseltown. And for them to find themselves basically as the biggest losers in Hollywood really does say something about how the attitude towards them, particularly amongst the powers that be, that really emboldened them when they made their massive exit from the royal family. It just shows how they've declined in popularity. It's really quite a fall from grace, if you will. For them to be classed as the biggest losers means that actually a lot of the people that you would think would hover around them and try and steal a bit of the limelight that the Sussexes should naturally actually have, given their proximity in the royal family. I mean, Prince Harry is a prince, for goodness sake. They're just not seeing really any value there. You know, this is a couple that went from having deals with Netflix and Spotify, these multi-million-pound deals. They were having interviews with Oprah. You couldn't run away from them in the headlines. They were literally everywhere. Everyone was thinking, what are they going to do next? Are they going to bring down the royal family? What trailblazing venture are they going to embark on next? And that's really all just shattered under their own feet, because they really just didn't understand a lot of the fundamental key characteristics that's made the royal family effectively last this long. You know, the never explain, never complain, the humility, the commitment to service and duty. We never really saw that with the Sussexes, and it really just made their star wane. And for that reason, many in Hollywood don't really see the point of attaching themselves to the Sussexes. I mean, they've had so many fails this year, it really beggars belief. It's very hard to even contemplate where to begin. 2023 hasn't been a good year for the Sussexes, and I imagine the decline is only going to continue. Again, like I was saying, with their relationship with the royal family, their reputation as well has calcified. Most people, in one way or another, have an opinion about the Sussexes, whether it's, you know, just not caring about them or not really seeing much point to them. Even if you're mega fans, you cannot argue that 2023 has been a good year for the pair.
And continuing with that decline, it appears their charity Archwell doesn't appear to be doing much work or too well on the donation front either.
Yeah, so in the span of a year, the Archwell Foundation has seen a drop in almost £9 million in the donations. This is down from, you know, they received about 10.4 million last year. This year they've received only about 1.2, I believe. So it's quite a steep decline in their donations. And this is another thing that's attached to their brand. As brand Sussex effectively tumbles down and is effectively free falling, so does anything attached to them, including the Archwell Foundation. Now, it's very strange, because you would think that this couple that have effectively said that the great crusaders and they're going to do good on their own terms and not be attached to the royal family, they're actually learning the hard way that the public perception of them does affect their ability to be able to have the kind of impact that they want to have. And unfortunately, that's a very tough lesson to learn now. They don't have any of the expertise, of the resources, or the experience that the royal family has, or really anyone that's run a charity organization or does charitable work. So they're really kind of finding their feet and learning as they go along. But a big part of that is reputation management. And when you spend the last few years moaning and whinging about your negative experience in the royal family and how awful your family are to you and the British press and all of these things, that does impact the public's perception of you.
Now, last week on the show, we covered the Regents and the Wales's Christmas cards. This week, the Sussexes have released their Christmas cards, and it doesn't feature their kids. Is that odd, Esther?
Well, I suspect it has something to do with their worldwide privacy tour. I'm not sure. You know, the kids who they've given the titles Prince and Princess, they've made a point of keeping them out of the spotlight, even though they themselves, the Sussexes, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, haven't made much effort to stay out of the spotlight themselves. I actually find it strange that they have Christmas cards to begin with. Now, we know family Christmas cards are nothing rare. The Blairs, Tony and Cherie Blair, have Christmas cards. You have politicians that have Christmas cards. Obviously, the royal family have Christmas cards. But you really have to wonder what their Christmas cards is in relation to, because they're not working members of the royal family. They're not a company. They're just a couple. I don't know if this is an attempt to kind of highlight that, yes, brand Sussex still exists. I find it a bit strange. I wonder who's going to be recipients of who are going to be the recipients of these Christmas cards. I certainly don't think any of their Christmas cards are going to make their way to Sandringham this year, to William and Kate in particular.
Now, rumours are swirling that Princess Beatrice and Eugenie have been keeping a somewhat lower profile because they may have potentially enhanced roles in the future. The think tank Civitas has warned that the monarchy risks abolishing itself by stealth if it doesn't add to the roster of working royals. Would it make sense for Beatrice and Eugenie to officially start work as working royals?
I mean, that's something that's you know, stranger things would have happened, should I say. And we have to remember that the Megxit, effectively, the exit of the Sussexes from, you know, the royal family wasn't just a loss in terms of, you know, them losing literal working members of the royal family, but you also lost resources and assets. The royal family engages in many public engagements throughout the year. I mean, Princess Anne is the hardest working royal. She engages in hundreds of engagements every year. There is work that needs to be done to represent this country and the Commonwealth, and by having fewer resources to do it, you do stretch other working members of the royal family quite thin, especially when they have families and other sort of personal commitments. So it does make sense that Princess Eugenie and Beatrice will eventually be brought into the fold. I think that that's something that would actually be quite beneficial to the king. We know how Prince Andrew has effectively crashed out of the royal family in disgrace, and it's his own fault. But the question is, should his daughters be punished for it? At the end of the day, the royal family is a much bigger than one or two, or in this case, 3 disgraced members exiting it in a very unfashionable way. So I can actually see that happening. I mean, they do a lot of charity work and sort of a lot of public engagements in their own right, and it's not something that would be alien to them to actually do things on behalf of the king. And I think they'd be primed to do it. And I definitely think if that were to be the case, the Sussexes could learn a lot from Princess Eugenie and Princess Beatrice.
And lastly, there have been extra invitations sent for Christmas at Sandringham, but not the ones that you might expect. Esther, who's coming?
So we know that Queen Camilla's children and her grandchildren are coming to Sandringham, and the king has been very deliberate in actually integrating Queen Camilla's family into the fold. We know that her grandkids played a prominent role in the king's coronation earlier this year. And again, the juxtaposition is quite an incredible thing to see. You have the king's own son, Prince Harry, and his wife and children that really have nothing to do with the royal family in any significant way. But you have the Queen Consort's children and grandchildren really being integrated into the fold. And it's quite an interesting thing to see, because I can't see this now status quo changing at any point. Unfortunately, this is how things are going to be for the foreseeable future. And it's really, I suspect it's something that's causing the king much distress, because it doesn't make sense for him to not have his own son and his own grandchildren there, but to continue to bring his wife's kids and grandkids into the fold. It's just quite an interesting dynamic going on there.
Esther Kraku, as always, thank you so much for joining the show and for your observations. No doubt we'll catch up shortly. Now, just before we go, well, the coronation was the centrepiece for this year, a hugely important ceremonial event with many moving parts and planned to within an inch of its life. Even so, there was still a little bit of room for humour. Take a look at this.
And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be amongst you and remain with you now and... No, that can't be right.
Always.
You must have said this before.
I knew that.
Yes. Be with you and remain with you always. Amen. Amen.
And that's the show for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Now, the Royal Report will continue over the Christmas break, with me hosting, of course, but you won't have to wait until Sunday. It will be broadcast on Fridays at 8 p.m. at Australian Eastern Daylight Time. But up next, though, is Newsnight. Good night, and we will see you on Friday.